Relationship to government. Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man, which is only for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God. Honor all people. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 13 to 17, Bible, NKJV. Visit sections 8 and 9 of our disclaimer page for a description of why this fellowship and ministry is against hate speech, hate crime, and violence. We are a peaceful group which respects, advocates, subsidizes, and even protects all lawful exercises of governmental power consistent with the state and federal constitutions, enacted law, and the constitutions and laws of any private group of people that wants to divorce the state and form their own private self-government. We are not against any government. In fact, we love the whole notion of government so much that we want to form our own government and to do it consistent with the original de jure constitutions and laws that began this country. The Declaration of Independence says that when the government we have becomes tyrannical, it is our right and even our duty to form our own competing and better government. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence makes it the duty of all Americans to legally divorce any government that becomes wasteful or abusive and provide a better and competing alternative. We the people cannot delegate an authority to any government to govern that they themselves do not also have. They have a right to withhold that delegation of authority and domiciliary allegiance, form their own civil government, and shift their domicile and allegiance, and tax money to that competing government. We believe this option is the only way to peacefully restore choice, competition, accountability, and efficiency to government. This is the only peaceful method of reforming corrupted governments provided by the Founding Fathers. Anyone who interferes with this process is indirectly advocating and sanctioning violence and anarchy, because all other options require violence. Engaging in acts of international terrorism, if the people who are being interfered with are legislatively foreign or alien because domiciled outside the jurisdiction of the government. Conducting an invasion of the states of the Union in violation of Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, in which they are the invaders. Engaging in criminal simulation of legal process against non-residents. Engaging in criminal identity theft as described in PDF Government Identity Theft, Form Number 05.046. Stealing property and private rights by converting them to public rights without the consent of the owner in violation of the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause. The Constitution attaches to the land and the private rights it protects are inalienable. An inalienable right is one you cannot legally give them away, even with your consent, and certainly not in exchange for the benefits of any government franchise. Working an injustice which courts are duty-bound to prevent. The definition of justice, according to the Constitution, is the right to be simply left alone, which would include being civilly governed by the common law rather than the statute law. PDF statute law is a civil franchise that makes the government intop df a pagan deity that supersedes the Christian God. If capitalism and competition keeps the economy healthy on the private side, there is no reason that it can't work in government as well. Any effort to restrict choice or perpetuate a monopoly on protection by a specific government is an effort to enslave and oppress the people. Below is the blueprint for accomplishing that transformation. PDF Self-Government Federation, Articles of Confederation, Form #10.003. If you would like to know what the government thinks of the content posted on this website, after its content was put under the microscope for over a year by the top legal minds in government, then we encourage you to read the article below. Note that this website is not owned or controlled by the party who is the subject of the article. The litigation which is described below therefore proceeded upon false premises and PDF false presumptions in this regard. Federal District Court rules on Hansen injunction, June 13, 2006 as a result of the above litigation. This website survived intense scrutiny by the Department of Justice, the IRS, and the federal judiciary and remains unaffected by the outcome of the litigation from the date the answer to the complaint was filed in June 2005 to the present time. A few minor changes were made to the member agreement, form number 01.001, the disclaimer, and the bookstore checkout screens, and a few of the materials were rewritten and improved, but there is nothing on this website that violates any law that we are aware of and which the government had evidence to prove violated any law. Both the government and the court were repeatedly provided with a long list of questions at least 4 different times asking them to identify anything that they thought was violative of enacted law, false, fraudulent, or violative of the order, and they refused every opportunity to do so. They were specifically asked to remain silent in responding to the questions if they agreed that everything on this website and everything in the pleadings before the court were truthful, accurate, and consistent with prevailing law, and they remained silent and therefore gave their stamp of approval to this website. The government was provided with a copy of nearly everything on this website on a DVD-ROM and were asked to inspect and critique anything that they thought was violative of enacted law, false, fraudulent, or violative of the order, and they refused every opportunity to do so. They were specifically asked to remain silent in responding to the questions if they agreed that everything on this website and everything in the pleadings before the court were truthful, accurate, and consistent with prevailing law, and they remained silent and therefore gave their stamp of approval to this website. The court order did not point out one factual error in anything currently posted on this website or identify anything as frivolous. When arguments described in our Liberty University and our memorandums of law were raised repeatedly by the defendant before the federal court and the DOJ, both the DOJ and the judge could not respond and were silent. The pleadings involved had our PDF federal pleading, motion, petition attachment, litigation tool number 01.002 attached to them, specifically asking the court and the plaintiff to remain silent on every fact or legal argument that they agreed was truthful and accurate. This means they agreed, under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 8b-6. See our pamphlet Silence as a Weapon and a Defense in Legal Discovery, form number 05.021, if you want to know more about this. There is simply no way to respond to truth that exposes your misdeeds with anything other than silence or an admission of guilt. The IRS agent who downloaded information off this website made himself subject to the member agreement, form number 01.001, and his affidavit attached to the court pleadings proves this. The PDF Terms of Use and Service, form number 01.016, section 5, item 6 says that all members, including the IRS agent, stipulate to admit everything on this website into evidence and that it is truthful and accurate. We can therefore honestly and truthfully make the following claim. This website has been reviewed for accuracy and approved as truthful, factual for them, and not for U.S., and accurate by the Department of Justice, the IRS, and the federal judiciary, and is one of very few freedom websites of its kind which can claim that important distinction. U.S. DOJ IRS Seal DOJ Seal. SEDM has prepared a member notice that it would like for only its members to read describing its official position on the above litigation. You may read it by clicking on the link below. Warning, if you are not a member, be advised that you will become one by clicking on this link to our member notice and availing yourself of the privileged content therein. The sovereign people are the government in the United States of America. Consequently, those people working in our public institutions are our servants, including the Supreme Court, the President, and the Congress. Consequently, this section will describe our relationship to these public servants. The words people of the United States and citizens are synonymous terms, and mean the same thing. They both describe the political body who, according to our republican institutions, form the sovereignty, and who hold the power and conduct the government through their representatives. They are what we familiarly call the sovereign people, and every citizen is one of this people, and a constituent member of this sovereignty. Quote. Boyd v. State of Nebraska, 143 U.S. 135 1892. As statutory non-resident non-persons and constitutional but not statutory citizens pursuant to 8 U.S.C. Section 1101 21, our allegiance is to the state, which is legally defined as we the people, and not the public servants who administer any government and serve them. They are the sovereign and our allegiance is to this sovereign. Our goal is to serve, protect, and empower this group of sovereigns, we the people, who the U.S. Supreme Court said was the government. Consequently, it is absolutely fraudulent and absurd to accuse us of being anti-government. We are against illegal activity, which is most prevalent among public servants and even court personnel at this time, but these people are not the government, but simply servants of the true sovereign and government, which is we the people. They have set up a de facto unlawful government and sham trust to benefit themselves personally, but they are not the government as legally defined. Whatever these constitutions and laws validly determine to be property, it is the duty of the federal government, through the domain of jurisdiction merely federal, to recognize to be property. And this principle follows from the structure of the respective governments, state and federal, and their reciprocal relations. They are different agents and trustees of the people of the several states, appointed with different powers and with distinct purposes, but whose acts, within the scope of their respective jurisdictions, are mutually obligatory. Dred Scott v. Sanford, 60 U.S. 393, 1856. Our biblical relationship and attitude towards government is described in detail in Commandments about the relationship of believers to the world government corruption, Form 11.401 corruption that violates both God's laws and/or man's laws and which believers in this ministry therefore have a duty to fight. We view the Constitution as a public contract, and a delegation of authority between citizens as the sovereigns, masters and the public servants who serve them. We also view the Bible as a sacred private contract, covenant between believers, who are the servants, and their God, who is the master. It too is a delegation of authority from God to us. According to the Declaration of Independence, all rights and sovereignty come from God, the Creator, through His divine word and law, and not from any earthly law or judge or man. The Bible, like the federal constitution, establishes a fiduciary relationship between the servants and their masters. No public servant or government instrumentality has the authority to interfere with or impair the obligation of either one of these two sacred contracts. Remember the word that I, Jesus, said to you, a public servant is not greater than his sovereign master. John chapter 15 verse 20, Bible, NKJV. The Constitution is also a public trust document, where employees within the government are trustees of the public trust and we the people are the beneficiaries. Whatever these constitutions and laws validly determine to be property, it is the duty of the federal government, through the domain of jurisdiction merely federal, to recognize to be property. And this principle follows from the structure of the respective governments, state and federal, and their reciprocal relations. They are different agents and trustees of the people of the several states, appointed with different powers and with distinct purposes, but whose acts, within the scope of their respective jurisdictions, are mutually obligatory. Dred Scott v. Sanford, 60 U.S. 393, 1856. Public servants who disobey the Constitution, in fact, are involved in witchcraft, idolatry, treason, and political heresy, which are not only punishable by death under man's law 18 U.S.C. section 2381, but also constitute the worst of all sins under God's laws. See the first 4 commandments of the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord and the people in the Constitution? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion of either the Constitution or the Bible is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word and laws of the sovereign Lord, or we the people, in the Constitution, He also has rejected you from being king and a sovereign over your government as a private citizen, or a public servant. 1 Sam 15:22-23, Bible, NKJV. The U.S. Supreme Court cites below establish that neither a single public servant nor an entire state or federal government can interfere with our right to accept and obey God's private contract, covenant with us, the Bible. Private law contracts always supersede public law. They cannot compel us to violate God's laws in that covenant, which is a sacred delegation of authority direct to us, just like the Constitution is a delegation of authority from us to our public servants. Neither can they violate the contract that binds them to us as the sovereigns and masters, which are the federal and state constitution. Independent of these views, there are many considerations which lead to the conclusion that the power to impair contracts, either the Constitution or the Holy Bible, by direct action to that end, does not exist with the general federal government. In the first place, one of the objects of the Constitution, expressed in its preamble, was the establishment of justice, and what that meant in its relations to contracts is not left, as was justly said by the late Chief Justice, in Hepburn v. Griswold, to inference or conjecture. As he observes, at the time the Constitution was undergoing discussion in the Convention, the Congress of the Confederation was engaged in framing the ordinance for the government of the Northwestern Territory, in which certain articles of compact were established between the people of the original states and the people of the territory, for the purpose, as expressed in the instrument, of extending the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, upon which the states, their laws and constitutions, were erected. By that ordinance it was declared, that, in the just preservation of rights and property, no law ought ever to be made, or have force in the said territory, that shall, in any manner, interfere with or affect private contracts or engagements bona fide and without fraud previously formed. The same provision, adds the Chief Justice, found more condensed expression in the prohibition upon the states in Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution against impairing the obligation of contracts, which has ever been recognized as an efficient safeguard against injustice, and though the prohibition is not applied in terms to the government of the United States, he expressed the opinion, speaking for himself and the majority of the court at the time, that it was clear that those who framed and those who adopted the Constitution intended that the spirit of this prohibition should pervade the entire body of legislation, and that the justice which the Constitution was ordained to establish was not thought by them to be compatible with legislation or judicial precedent of an opposite tendency. 8 Wall. 623. 99 U.S. 700, 765. Similar views are found expressed in the opinions of other judges of this court. Sinking Fund Cases, 99 U.S. 700, 1878. A state can no more impair the obligation of a contract by her organic law constitution than by legislative enactment, for her constitution is a law within the meaning of the Contract Clause of the National Constitution. Railroad Co. v. 115 U.S. 650, 673. McClure, 10 Wall. 511, Ohio Life Inns. Antico, v. DeBolt, 16 How. 429, SEDG. Saint and Const. Law, 637. And the obligation of her contracts is as fully protected by that instrument against impairment by legislation as are contracts between individuals exclusively. State v. Wilson, 7 Cranch, 164, Providence Bank v. Billings, 4 Pet. 514, Green v. Biddle, 8 Wheat. 1, Woodruff v. Trapnell, 10 How. 190, Wolf v. New Orleans, 103 U.S. 358. New Orleans Gas Company v. Louisiana Light Company, 115 U.S. 650, 1885. From the differences existing between feudal sovereignties and government founded on compacts, public contracts called constitutions, it necessarily follows that their respective prerogatives must differ. Sovereignty is the right to govern, a nation or state sovereign is the person or persons in whom that resides. In Europe the sovereignty is generally ascribed to the prince, here it rests with the people, there, the sovereign actually administers the government, here, never in a single instance, our governors are the agents of the people, and at most stand in the same relation to their sovereign, in which regents in Europe stand to their sovereigns. Their princes have personal powers, dignities, and preeminences, our rulers have none but official, nor do they public servants partake in the sovereignty of we the people otherwise, or in any other capacity, than as private citizens. Chisholm, Exer, v. Georgia, 2 Dall. U.S. 419, 1 L. ed. 454, 457, 471, 472, 1794. This website is located outside of the legislative jurisdiction of the United States federal government. The only thing it offers is copyrighted religious educational materials that are entirely of educational and First Amendment nature. Religious statements and beliefs that are not factual or actionable in any manner and are not admissible as evidence pursuant to Fed. Rul. EV. 610. Intended to warn the people about corruption in their government, the legal profession, and the courts and what God says in PDF His law that we can and should do to stop it and prevent being harmed by it. Intended only for use in PDF petitioning the government for a redress of grievances under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. This is a protected right. Intended to educate and empower people, and to minimize harm to the reader. Our definition of harm in that context defines God's eternal wrath because of our disobedience to PDF His law to be far more damaging than any court or jail could temporarily inflict on any man for disobeying an unjust earthly and vain law. This view of the definition of harm is part of the foundation of our sincerely held religious convictions, which are further explained in the Holy Bible. If you want to know the consequences of violating God's law, read Deuteronomy chapter 27 verses 11 to 26, Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 15 to 68. Certainly the harm described in these passages far outweighs any court sentence that any judge could ever mete out. Therefore, the lesser harm results by people obeying God's law when there is a conflict between God's law and man's law. Since the only purpose of both law and government are to prevent harm, see Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302, Sections 3.3 and 4.4.3, then courts of justice must hold God's laws in higher regard than man's laws within the context of the religious individual in cases where there are conflicts of law between man's and God's laws. We ought to obey God rather than men. Acts chapter 5 verses 27 to 29, Bible, NKJV. Not offered with any kind of guarantee of accuracy or effectiveness, or as legal advice. Not connected with any PDF government franchise or subject to the terms of any government franchise agreements such as the Internal Revenue Code Subtitle A and the Social Security Act. IRC Subtitle A describes an excise tax upon the PDF trade or business franchise. Not subject to any international tax treaties or international taxation. Not offered to residents who are all aliens in nearly every tax code on the planet within the county in which this website is situated, and therefore not subject to local taxation, not subject to tax laws or government regulation because related entirely to religious practice and expression, which is a protected right. Not derived from privileged or licensed foreign commerce under 26 U.S.C. Section 7001. See Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302, Section 5.2.11. Not connected with a trade or business in the United States, which means donations to the ministry are not income corporate profit derived from the U.S. government in connection with a public office. See Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302, Section 5.6.12. All those connected to the ministry consist entirely of non-residents relative to the federal zone, and statutory non-resident non-persons who are non-taxpayers not subject to the Internal Revenue Code and not engaged in a trade or business. Our member agreement does not allow any of the following to use our materials in their interactions with third parties in the government, courts, or legal profession, or to be members in good standing, U.S. citizens, residents, aliens, U.S. persons, or taxpayers under either federal law or the Internal Revenue Code. SEDM is a non-profit religious fellowship and association that is against government registration, enumeration, or regulation efforts directed against religious institutions. This, we believe, simply compromises separation of church and state and gives the government undue influence over churches that stifles their First Amendment rights and compromises their independence. Our society would be less than true to its heritage if it lacked abiding concern for the values of its young people, and we acknowledge the profound belief of adherents to many faiths that there must be a place in the student's life for precepts of a morality higher even than the law we today enforce. We express no hostility to those aspirations, nor would our oath permit us to do so. A relentless and all-pervasive attempt to exclude religion from every aspect of public life could itself become inconsistent with the Constitution. See Abington School District, Supra, at 306 Goldberg, J., concurring. Nearly half a century of review and refinement of Establishment Clause jurisprudence has distilled one clear understanding: government may neither promote nor affiliate itself with any religious doctrine or organization, nor may it obtrude itself in the internal affairs of any religious institution. The application of these principles to the present case mandates the decision reached today by the court. The mixing of government and religion can be a threat to free government, even if no one is forced to participate. When the government puts its imprimatur on a particular religion, it conveys a message of exclusion to all those who do not adhere to the favored beliefs. 9. A government cannot 505 U.S. 607 be premised on the belief that all persons are created equal when it asserts that God prefers some. Only anguish, hardship and bitter strife result when zealous religious groups struggle with one another to obtain the government's stamp of approval. Engel, 370 U.S. at 429, see also Lemon, 403 U.S. at 622–623, Aguilar v. Felton, 473 U.S. 402, 416 1985, Powell, J., concurring. 10. Such a struggle can strain a political system to the breaking point. Walls v. Tax Commission, 397 U.S. 664, 694 1970, opinion of Harlan, J. When the government arrogates to itself a role in religious affairs, it abandons its obligation as guarantor of democracy. Democracy requires the nourishment of dialogue and dissent, while religious faith puts its trust in an ultimate divine authority above all human deliberation. When the government appropriates religious truth, it transforms rational debate into theological decree. Nuchterlein, note, the free exercise boundaries of permissible accommodation under the Establishment Clause, 99 Yale L.J. 1127, 1131 1990. Those who disagree no longer are questioning the policy judgment of the elected but the rules of a higher authority who is beyond reproach. 505 U.S. 608. Madison warned that government officials who would use religious authority to pursue secular ends exceed the commission from which they derive their authority, and are tyrants. The people who submit to it are governed by laws made neither by themselves nor by an authority derived from them, and are slaves. Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments 1785 in the Complete Madison 300 S. Potover, ed.1953. Democratic government will not last long when proclamation replaces persuasion as the medium of political exchange. Likewise, we have recognized that our religion flourishes in greater purity, without than with the aid of government. 11 id. at 309. 2. Make room for as wide a variety of beliefs and creeds as the spiritual needs of man deem necessary. Zorich v. Clausen, 343 U.S. 306, 313 1952. The government must not align itself with any one of them. When the government favors a particular religion or sect, the disadvantage to all others is obvious, but even the favored religion may fear being tainted with a corrosive secularism. Grand Rapids School Dist. v. Ball, 473 U.S. 373, 385 1985. The favored religion may be compromised as political figures reshape the religion's beliefs for their own purposes, it may be reformed as government largesse brings government regulation. 12. Keeping religion in the hands of private groups minimizes state intrusion on religious choice, and best enables each religion to flourish according to the 505 U.S. 609 zeal of its adherents and the appeal of its dogma. Zorich, 343 U.S. at 313. It is these understandings and fears that underlie our Establishment Clause jurisprudence. We have believed that religious freedom cannot exist in the absence of a free democratic government, and that such a government cannot endure when there is fusion between religion and the political regime. We have believed that religious freedom cannot thrive in the absence of a vibrant religious community, and that such a community cannot prosper when it is bound to the secular. And we have believed that these were the animating principles behind the adoption of the Establishment Clause. To that end, our cases have prohibited government endorsement of religion, its sponsorship, and active involvement in religion, whether or not citizens were coerced to conform. Lee v. Weissman, 505 U.S. 577 1992. SEDM therefore cannot and will not allow the government to register or enumerate it or seek any kind of government-recognized 501 non-profit, or charitable organization status, nor will allow itself to be discriminated against by government because it refuses to do any of these things. And have no fellowship or association with the unfruitful works of government darkness, but rather reprove, rebuke and expose them. EPH. 511, Bible, NKJV. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law, man's law. Gal. 518, Bible, NKJV. Shall the throne of iniquity, the U.S. Congress and the federal judiciary, which devises evil by obfuscating the law to expand their jurisdiction and consolidate all economic power in their hands by taking it away from the states, have fellowship with you? They gather together against the life of the righteous, and condemn innocent blood of non-taxpayers and persons outside their jurisdiction, which is an act of extortion and racketeering. But the Lord has been my defense, and my God the rock of my refuge. He has brought on them their own iniquity, and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. The Lord our God, and those who obey him and his word, shall cut them off from power and from receiving illegal bribes cleverly disguised by an obfuscated law as legitimate taxes. Psalm chapter 94 verses 20-23, Bible, NKJV. Question for doubters: who else but Congress and the judiciary can devise evil by law? Come out from among them, the unbelievers and government idolaters, and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verses 17-18, Bible, NKJV. Nevertheless, God's solid foundation stands firm, sealed with this inscription: the Lord knows those who are his, and everyone who confesses the name of the Lord must turn away from, not associate with, wickedness wherever it is found, and especially in government. 2 Tim. 2:19, Bible, NKJV. A state-created orthodoxy imposed through illegal enforcement or even involuntary enforcement of the revenue codes against religious institutions puts at grave risk that freedom of belief and conscience, which are the sole assurance that religious faith is real, not imposed. Lee v. Weissman, 505 U.S. 577, 1992. Any effort to regulate or tax us as a religious ministry amounts to compelled association with the government in violation of the First Amendment. The constitutional rights of those spreading their religious beliefs through the spoken and printed word are not to be gauged by standards governing retailers or wholesalers of books. The right to use the press for expressing one's views is not to be measured by the protection afforded commercial handbills. It should be remembered that the pamphlets of Thomas Paine were not distributed free of charge. It is plain that a religious organization needs funds to remain a going concern. But an itinerant evangelist, however misguided or intolerant he may be, does not become a mere book agent by selling the Bible or religious tracts to help defray his expenses or to sustain him. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion are available to all, not merely to those who can pay their own way. Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, 319 U.S. 105, 1943. Just as there is freedom to speak, to associate, and to believe, so also there is freedom not to speak, associate, or believe. The right to speak and the right to refrain from speaking on a government tax return, and in violation of the Fifth Amendment when coerced, for instance, are complementary components of the broader concept of individual freedom of mind. Woolley v. Maynard, 430 U.S. 703, 1977. Freedom of conscience dictates that no individual may be forced to espouse ideological causes with which he disagrees. The heart of the First Amendment is the notion that the individual should be free to believe as he will, and that in a free society one's beliefs should be shaped by his mind and by his conscience rather than coerced by the state through illegal enforcement of the revenue laws. Abood v. Detroit Board of Education, 431 U.S. 209, 1977. Freedom from compelled association is a vital component of freedom of expression. Indeed, freedom from compelled association illustrates the significance of the liberty or personal autonomy model of the First Amendment. As a general constitutional principle, it is for the individual and not for the state to choose one's associations and to define the persona which he holds out to the world. First Amendment Law in a Nutshell, Baron Dinez, West Publishing, ISBN 0-314-22677-X, pp. 266-267. Not only is such compelled association in conflict with the First Amendment, but it also is a sin, and violates God's laws and our sincerely held religious beliefs. According to Jesus, we cannot serve two masters, God and government, at the same time. No servant or religious ministry or biological person can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, government. Luke chapter 16 verse 13, Bible, NKJV. We as a ministry can only serve God and not government. To serve and obey anyone or anything other than exclusively God is to violate our private contract, covenant, oath with Him in the Bible. The doctrine is, that allegiance cannot be due to two sovereigns, God v. government, and taking an oath of allegiance to a new, is the strongest evidence of withdrawing allegiance from a previous, sovereign. Talbot v. Jansen, 3 U.S. 133 1795, from the syllabus but not the opinion. And now, Israel, believers, Christians, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways by obeying his holy laws, and to love him, to serve only the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes which I command you today for your good. Indeed, heaven and the highest heavens belong to the Lord your God, also the earth with all that is in it. The Lord delighted only in your fathers, to love them, and he chose their descendants after them, you above all peoples, as it is this day. Therefore circumcise the foreskin of your heart, and be stiff-necked no longer. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall fear only the Lord your God, you shall serve only him, and to him you shall hold fast, and take oaths in his name. He is your praise, and he is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt with 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of heaven in multitude. Doi. 1012-22, Bible, NKJV. God is a jealous God. Compare X 20-5, 34-14, doi 32-16, Zech 8-2, I-Cor 1022, and hence he will not tolerate divided allegiance. Pfeiffer, C.F., and Harrison, E.F. 1962. The Wycliffe Bible Commentary, New Testament. Moody Press, Chicago, Commentary on James chapter 4 verse 5. There is no conflict with civil authority in choosing this hierarchy of allegiance, because God's laws call for us to love our neighbor, so we aren't therefore allowed to harm him. It is impossible for a faithful Christian to be a bad citizen. Since the only legitimate purpose of civil government is to prevent harm, civil government would quickly become superfluous and unnecessary if everyone religiously obeyed only God's laws. That is why the Bible says, He, God, brings the princes and kings and presidents to nothing, he makes the judges of the earth useless. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 23, Bible, NKJV. To not worship and serve and obey only God and his perfect laws would be to risk losing our salvation and violating our sacred covenant contract with God. No government has the authority to order us to violate such a contract covenant. Away with you, Satan. For it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only, not the government, you shall serve with your labor or your earnings from labor. Jesus in Matt. 4:10, Bible, NKJV. You were bought at a price, do not become slaves of men, and remember that governments are made up exclusively of men. 1 Cor. 7:23, Bible, NKJV. Stand fast therefore in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage to the government or the income tax or the IRS or federal statutes that are not positive law and do not have jurisdiction over us. Galatians chapter 5 verse 1, Bible, NKJV. Sovereignty and salvation on the one hand, and being subject to government extortion or censorship or regulation, on the other hand, are mutually exclusive for any religious undertaking. We can't function as a ministry with such conflicting allegiances and conflict of interest without violating both God's and man's laws simultaneously. In the general course of human nature, a power over a man's or a ministry's subsistence, including through involuntary or illegal taxation, amounts to a power over his will. Alexander Hamilton, Federalist Paper No. 79. Any other approach to income taxation, if not entirely consensual, amounts to slavery off-site link, which violates the 13th Amendment off-site link prohibition against involuntary servitude. The Constitution's clauses on taxation off-site link and slavery off-site link cannot contradict each other, or absurdity and chaos will result. The purpose of law is to bring order, not chaos, and the Constitution is law. And the Constitution itself is in every real sense a law, the lawmakers being the people themselves, in whom under our system all political power and sovereignty primarily resides, and through whom such power and sovereignty primarily speaks. It is by that law, and not otherwise, that the legislative, executive, and judicial agencies which it created exercise such political authority as they have been permitted, by we the people, to possess. The Constitution speaks for itself in terms so plain that to misunderstand their import is not rationally possible. We the people of the United States, it says, do ordain and establish this Constitution. Ordain and establish. These are definite words of enactment, and without more would stamp what follows with the dignity and character of law. The framers of the Constitution, however, were not content to let the matter rest here, but provided explicitly, this Constitution, and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. Const. Art. 6, cl. 2. The supremacy of the Constitution as law is thus declared without qualification. That supremacy is absolute. The supremacy of a statute enacted by Congress is not absolute but conditioned upon its being made in pursuance of the Constitution. Carter v. Carter Coal Co., 298 U.S. 238, 1936. Involuntary taxation or regulation of anything that is not demonstrably harmful to the public also violates the Declaration of Independence, which says that all just powers of government derive from the consent of the governed. Education and public discourse can never be harmful, not only because the First Amendment says so, but also because the Supreme Court says so. This court has not yet fixed the standard by which to determine when a danger shall be deemed clear, how remote the danger may be and yet be deemed present, and what degree of evil shall be deemed sufficiently substantial to justify resort to abridgment of free speech and assembly as the means of protection. To reach sound conclusions on these matters, we must bear in mind why a state is, ordinarily, denied the power to prohibit dissemination of social, economic and political doctrine which a vast majority of its citizens believes to be false and fraught with evil consequence. 274 U.S. 357, 375. Those who won our independence believed that the final end of the state was to make men free to develop their faculties, and that in its government the deliberative forces should prevail over the arbitrary. They valued liberty both as an end and as a means. They believed liberty to the secret of happiness and courage to be the secret of liberty. They believed that freedom to think as you will and to speak and educate as you think are means indispensable to the discovery and spread of political truth, that without free speech and assembly discussion would be futile, that with them, discussion affords ordinarily adequate protection against the dissemination of noxious doctrine, that the greatest menace to freedom is an inert people, that public discussion and education is a political duty, and that this should be a fundamental principle of the American government. 3. They recognized the risks to which all human institutions are subject. But they knew that order cannot be secured merely through fear of punishment for its infraction, that it is hazardous to discourage thought, hope and imagination, that fear breeds repression, that repression breeds hate, that hate menaces stable government, that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss and educate other people about freely supposed grievances and proposed remedies, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsels is good ones. Believing in the power of reason as applied through public discussion, they eschewed silence. 274 U.S. 357, 376. Coerced by law or a corrupted government, the argument of force in its worst form. Recognizing the occasional tyrannies of governing majorities, they amended the Constitution so that free speech and assembly should be guaranteed. Whitney v. California, 274 U.S. 357, 1927. In a free country where liberty prevails over tyranny, anything not consensual and entirely and explicitly voluntary is unjust. Period. We either have government by consent or we have a terrorist government. There is no middle ground on this issue, and Thomas Jefferson agreed with this by his words in the Declaration of Independence. One cannot be half pregnant or half free. Neither can consent be assumed or presumed, but must continually be proven with evidence in writing explicitly and by informed consent, or it should be presumed not to exist at all. This is the essence of living in a country whose system of jurisprudence requires being presumed innocent until proven guilty by a preponderance of admissible evidence. Waivers of constitutional rights not only must be voluntary, explicitly consensual, they must be knowingly intelligent and fully informed and fully educated acts, done with sufficient awareness of the relevant circumstances and consequences. Brady v. U.S. 397 U.S. 742, 1970. By following God's calling to create a ministry to educate people about what they are agreeing or consenting to in filling out government forms, we are simply ensuring that the consent of the sovereign people to participate in the municipal donation program for the District of Columbia national government that is deceitfully called a federal tax by our covetous public servants is fully informed and therefore truly and entirely voluntary as the Supreme Court requires. Our system of taxation is based upon voluntary assessment and payment, not distraint. Flora v. U.S. 362 U.S. 145 1960. Nothing can be called voluntary which is backed up by any kind of enforcement powers, and in fact, PDF the IRS has absolutely no enforcement powers against human beings under Part 1 of the Treasury Regulations for Title 26 other than those who are instrumentalities of the government. We can't have a voluntary system so long as the IRS goes out illegally terrorizing and persecuting or deceiving those people and organizations in a foreign state, states of the Union, who educate others about the fact that they can choose not to volunteer to become taxpayers. In fact, the only persons which the IRS can lawfully enforce against are only federal employees, off-site link, instrumentalities, and public officers who are effectively connected with a trade or business in the United States, for which no implementing regulations are required, as revealed in 44 U.S.C. Section 1505 and 5 U.S.C. Section 553 2. See our pamphlet Why Your Government is Either a Thief or You Are a Public Officer for Income Tax Purposes, Form number 05.008 for details. Why doesn't the Congress and the federal judiciary quit pretending like the Internal Revenue Code is law that people in states of the Union have an obligation to obey? PDF It has been repealed since 1939 and yet they continue to deceive people by calling it law. This is a lie, at least in the context of those who do not maintain a physical domicile anywhere within the District of Columbia or the Federal Zone, which includes most Americans born within and living within states of the Union. See and rebut Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302 Off-site link Sections 5.4.6 through 5.4.6.6 and PDF What is Law, Form number 05.048 for exhaustive proof of the scam. Why won't the IRS quit pretending that Subtitle A of the Internal Revenue Code is a direct unapportioned tax in the case of people living in states of the Union? They have taken great pains to deceive people by hiding the fact that Subtitle A in fact is an indirect excise tax on privileges and that the taxable activity in most cases is that of a trade or business. Off-site link. When is this kind of deceit and obfuscation going to end? See Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302 Off-site link, Section 5.6.12 for details. Click here for an article on this subject. Why won't the IRS quit pretending like people who are not subject to federal jurisdiction domiciled in constitutional states of the Union are all federal employees off-site link and public officers, which they obviously know is fraud and which even the compelled and involuntary submission of a W-4 form doesn't prove? PDF Click here for details. Why won't the IRS heed and obey the Supreme Court like the rest of us have to by recognizing that it has no enforcement powers for Subtitle A off-site link of the infernal satanic Revenue Code? PDF Click here or read Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302 Off-site link, Sections 5.4.9 through 5.4.13 for details. See also Federal Enforcement Authority within States of the Union, Form number 05.032. Why must it terrorize, threaten, propagandize, and lie to non-federal businesses and financial institutions who are outside its jurisdiction using its publications and by sending out fraudulent securities called a notice of levies and notice of lien to county recorders and employers to enlist them as its voluntary enforcement agents? Why won't the SEC demonstrate equal protection of the laws by prosecuting this kind of deliberate securities fraud? These fraudulent assessments are sold on the open market as securities by the government, and this is a disgraceful sham. See Legal Deception, Propaganda, and Fraud, Form number 05.014. Why must it abuse its authority by creating PDF false presumptions on its forms that people are taxpayers off-site link, U.S. citizens off-site link, and reside within federal jurisdiction, when none of these facts are actually true in most cases? See Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302 Off-site link, Sections 4.9 through 4.12 and Chapter 5 for further details. See also PDF Presumption, Chief Weapon for Unlawfully Expanding Federal Jurisdiction, Form number 05.017. Why is it that the IRS is not required by the federal judiciary to obey the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act (FDCPA) by providing original proof of a debt, which in this case is a valid, procedurally correct, lawfully executed assessment document signed under penalty of perjury as required by 26 U.S.C. Section 6065, to the public immediately when demanded? Why does the IRS continually violate 26 U.S.C. Section 6020(b) by doing involuntary assessments against human beings living in states of the Union and in violation of the Constitution? Why do they do correspondence audits that propose an assessment and then ignore non-taxpayers who respond by refusing to consent to the proposal and thereby making the proposal final? PDF. Click here for more evidence of this massive fraud. Why can't the IRS and the government follow the same rules as everyone else by getting the signature of a judge and an abstract of judgment from a state, not federal, court that is outside its jurisdiction in order to procure monies from others under the authority of a law that it insists exists but which in fact doesn't? Doesn't equal protection of the laws demand this? Isn't equal protection of the laws the foundation of all free governments? See PDF requirement for equal protection and equal treatment, form number 05.033. Why do the federal district and circuit court continue to lie to the populace that they are Article 3 courts who have any jurisdiction over a foreign sovereign domiciled in a foreign state called a State of the Union? Lies. Click here for details. The answer to all the above questions is that your public servants love covet money, and the power and control and the tyranny it produces more than they love truth, justice, morality, protecting your rights, or God. The love of your money is the root of all government evil. 1 Tim. 6:10, Bible, NKJV. 2. Mission Statement. In God we trust. All others from the legal and political professions we investigate. Beware lest anyone, and especially lawyers and politicians, cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, including deceptive laws and political and media propaganda, according to the basic carnal principles of the world, and not according to Christ, for in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him, who is the head of all principality and power. Call. 228-10, Bible, NKJV. Then Jesus said to them, Take heed and beware, investigate of the leaven, teachings, laws, doctrine, and publications of the Pharisees, lawyers, and the Sadducees, political leaders. How is it you do not understand that I did no speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware, investigate and expose of the leaven of bread, but of the false or usurious doctrine, laws, statutes, and publications of the Pharisees, lawyers, and Sadducees, political leaders. Matt. 16-6, 11, 12, Bible, NKJV. Be diligent to investigate the truth for yourself and thereby present yourself and the public servants who are your fiduciaries and stewards under the Constitution approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word and the deeds of truth. But shun profane babblings, government propaganda, tyranny, and usurpation, for they will increase to more ungodliness. And their message and their harmful effects will spread like cancer to destroy our society and great republic. 2 Tim. 2:15-17, Bible, NKJV. This ministry is an answer to a calling by the Lord to feed his sheep, his flock, and his family with knowledge and tools in order to help them protect themselves from criminals and thieves, wolves everywhere, for whoever does the will of God, described in God's laws, is my brother and my sister and mother. Jesus, in Mark chapter 3 verse 35, NKJV. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, a disciple and a fisherman, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these fish, or whatever other fixation you have in your life? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He, Jesus, said to him, Feed my lambs, family. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He, Jesus, said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep, flock. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands of faith, and another, God himself, will gird you and carry you with his ministry where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, Follow me. John chapter 21 verses 15-19, Bible, NKJV. Our regular form of worship shall consist in proclaiming God's love and salvation and the need for repentance to a lost world. Focusing our energies on the same problem areas within our society as Jesus did. Jesus said he came down to call sinners to repentance, not the righteous, and the first place he visited to find sinners who needed his help was the tax collector's office. See the Bible. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and education and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, unlawfully stealing, in this case. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. ECC 226, Bible, NKJV. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew, Levi, sitting at the tax office, IRS. And he, God, said to him, the tax collector, "Follow me, Jesus." So he arose and followed him. Now it happened, as Jesus sat at the table in the house, that behold, many tax collectors and other similar sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees, lawyers, saw it, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher, educator, SEDM, eat with and teach and disciple tax collectors and sinners?" Synonymous. When Jesus heard that, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners, to repentance." Matt 9-9-23, Bible, NKJV. Then tax collectors came to be baptized, and said to him, John the Baptist, "Teacher, educator, SEDM, what shall we do to be saved?" And he said to them, "Collect no more than what is appointed to you under the law." Luke chapter 3 verses 12-13, Bible, NKJV. And when all the people heard him, Jesus, even the tax collectors, the most sinful of all people on earth, justified God, having been baptized with the baptism of John. Luke chapter 7 verse 29, Bible, NKJV. When they, Jesus and Apostle Peter, had come to Capernaum, those collectors who received the temple tax, the government has become the modern-day socialist pagan god, and Washington, D.C. as our civic temple, came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher, Jesus, not pay the temple tax?" He, Apostle Peter, said, "Yes, Jesus, our fearless leader as Christians, was a non-taxpayer," and when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings, governments of the earth lawfully take customs or taxes, from their sons, citizens and subjects, or from strangers, aliens, which are synonymous with residents in the tax code, and exclude citizens?" Peter said to him, "From strangers, aliens, residents only." See 26 CFR. Sections 1.121 in 26 CFR. Section 1.14412 c. 3. Jesus said to him, "Then the sons, citizens of the republic, who are all sovereign, non-citizen nationals, and non-residents but not constitutional aliens, are free, sovereign over their own person and labor." E.g. sovereign immunity, Matt. 1724-27, Bible, NKJV. Then the whole multitude of them, democracy rather than republic, arose and led him to Pilate, representative of Caesar, government. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation, and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king, a sovereign, which is what everyone in America is who has the proper citizenship status." Luke chapter 23 verses 1-2, Bible, NKJV. Educating and evangelizing every non-taxpayer and sovereign American member who wants to learn about God's laws and how to apply them to our life in a practical way. We are here to feed God's sheep and God's flock with knowledge and wisdom whose only source is God and God's holy word. We are God's shepherds and watchmen who are here to warn and educate the sheep about government wolves in their midst so that the sheep, our members, are not harmed. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes, laws, which the Lord God has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. Lev. 10-9-11, Bible, NKJV. The Lord is their our strength, and he is the saving refuge of his anointed. Save your people, and bless your inheritance, shepherd them also, and bear them up forever. Psalm chapter 28 verses 8-9, Bible, NKJV. And I, God, will give you shepherds SEDM according to my heart, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. Jeremiah chapter 3 verse 15, Bible, NKJV. I will set up shepherds over them who will feed them with education and knowledge only, and they shall fear their public disservants no more, nor be dismayed, nor shall they be lacking, says the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 23 verse 4, Bible, NKJV. Woe to the worthless shepherd, who leaves the flock. A sword shall be against his arm and against his right eye, his arm shall completely wither, and his right eye shall be totally blinded. Zechariah chapter 11 verse 17, Bible, NKJV. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things, as we do on this website. Mark chapter 6 verse 34, Bible, NKJV. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Jesus in John chapter 10 verse 11, Bible, NKJV, protecting and loving our neighbor by continually petitioning form number 05.049 our public servants under the petition clause of the First Amendment, for redress of grievances, illegal and immoral acts, against our members. All of the materials we produce ultimately have only this purpose, because many if not most of them are intended to be submitted to government to petition for a remedy of illegal and unconstitutional abuses by specific public servants. If government had been doing this job to begin with by allowing evidence of its own wrongdoing to be admitted in legal proceedings and by allowing public servants who institute such egregious wrongdoing to be punished, then we wouldn't even need to exist as a ministry. To stifle our ministry is to interfere with protected federal witnesses, witness tampering, in violation of 18 U.S.C. section 1512, and to engage in anti-whistleblowing off-site link activity, which is a felony. Encouraging a return to the traditional values that made this country great, including faith in God, personal responsibility off-site link, morality, the rule of law not statutes or codes, but real law based on the God's laws, a republican rather than democratic political system, limited and accountable government, and love for our neighbor. Maintaining and expanding the separation of powers within government to prevent tyranny and protect our freedoms and liberties. Encouraging the participation of godly and moral and religious people in government and the legal profession. See above. However, we will not endorse or promote any specific or singular political candidate or political party. Teaching our audience how to be self-supporting and self-governing so we don't need to be subject to man's vain government or laws, and don't need to be privileged or subject to federal jurisdiction in order to have protection, because they instead trust God and other believers who are loyal to God's law for that protection. See Ezra chapter 8 verses 21 to 22. This includes 8.1 Getting married without state-issued licenses. See the Sovereign Christian Marriage, form number 06.009 book. 8.2 Teaching families how to govern themselves without the need for the government or legal profession by using private family courts and binding arbitration of believers when there are problems. See the Family Constitution, Form #13.003 off-site link book, sections 3.9 through 3.9.4. 8.2 Advancing the cause of common law ecclesiastical courts and boycotting participation in civil courts because the government and the legal profession have become totally corrupted. See 1 Cor. 6-5-7. 8.3 Showing people and parents how to live without social security numbers or government benefits. 8.4 Providing tools to allow people to fire the de facto usurpers and set up their own competing de jure civil government. See Self-Government Federation, Articles of Confederation, Form #13.002 Preventing the legal system from enslaving and oppressing the population and thereby violating God's laws. See Matt. 16-6, 11, 12. Our religious ministry is based only on the Holy Bible. Our internal affairs will also be governed by our Sovereignty Education and Defense Ministry (SEDM) Articles of Mission, Form number 01.004. The following video by Deans of Divinity at secular Ivy League schools, Christianity and Human Flourishing, The Role of Law and Politics off-site link Emory School of Law, concludes the following, which is completely consistent with our mission: Christianity is at its best when it pursues freedom and justice. See minutes 20-21. Christianity is at its worst when it pursues an exclusion and sectarian agenda. Minutes 21-22. By this he means, 2.1 when it pursues benefits, privileges, and franchises. This has the effect of dividing people up between the haves and the have-nots and puts them at war with each other in the political and legal sphere. 2.2 when it divides people into competing sects or groups vying for selfish political or material goals at the expense of another group. An example would be the war between the haves and have-nots described by the U.S. Supreme Court in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust. The best role for religion is to oppose the use of force in a political or legal context. See Minute 30. Our mission is the same as Nehemiah described in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible, who followed God's sovereign calling and commission to rebuild the wall that protected the people in the city of Jerusalem from their surrounding heathen neighbors and governments. That wall was a figurative wall of separation between the church, which was God's followers the Israelites, and the state, which was the rest of the foreigners and the king who did not serve God or fear him. The religious people had neglected obeying God's laws and commandments and thereby become slaves of the surrounding kings and political rulers. The survivors Christians who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of separation between church, which was the Jews, and state, which was the heathens around them, of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. Nay. 1-3, Bible, NKJV. Then I said to them, You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of separation in Jerusalem that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, Let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us, and said, What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them, and said to them, The God of heaven himself will prosper us, therefore we his servants will arise and build the wall of separation between church and state. Nay. 3:17-18, Bible, NKJV. Nehemiah was heavily ridiculed and persecuted by the government in his campaign to rebuild the wall. But it so happened, when Sanballat the U.S. government, IRS, heard that we were rebuilding the wall that he was furious and very indignant, and mocked the Jews, Christian patriots. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, What are these feeble Jews, Christian patriots, doing? Will they fortify themselves? Now Tobiah the Ammonite, part of the government, was beside him, and he said, Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised, turn their reproach on their own heads and give them, the opponents of the wall of separation, as plunder to their socialist fellow citizens in a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders of the wall. So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. And our adversaries said, They will neither know nor see anything, till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. Nay. 4:1-11, Bible, NKJV. At one point, the heathens and non-believers even complained that the Jews were going to leave the tax rolls, so they were left holding the bag. And there was a great outcry of the socialist people and their wives at the voting booths and in the jury boxes against their Jewish brethren who were building the wall. For there were those who said, Our sons, and our daughters are many, therefore let us get grain through government usury by unjust taxation, that we may eat and live. There were also some who said, We have mortgaged our lands and vineyards and houses, that we might buy grain because of the famine. There were also those who said, We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and indeed we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves to the king and his taxes and the banksters, and some of our daughters have been brought into slavery. It is not in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. Nay. 5:1-5, Bible, NKJV. Nehemiah's righteous response was to rebuke the nobles and rulers, the government leaders and the tax collectors, for their usury and extortion, as we frequently do on this website, and I became very angry when I heard their outcry in these words. After serious thought, I rebuked the nobles and rulers, and said to them, Each of you is exacting usury from his brother, so I called a great assembly against them, as we attempt to do here on this website. And I said to them, According to our ability we have redeemed our Jewish, Christian, brethren who were sold to the nations. Now indeed, will you even sell your brethren? Or should they be sold to us? Then they, the government leaders, were silenced because of guilt about their usury and extortion, and found nothing to say. Then I said, What you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? I also, with my brethren and my servants, am lending them money and grain. Please, let us stop this usury, illegal and unjust taxation and government extortion. IRS and the government must restore to them, even this day, their financial control over their labor and their lands, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses, also 1/100 of the money and the grain, the new wine and the oil, that you have charged them. So they, the government, said, We will restore it, and will require nothing from them, we will do as you say. Then I called the priests, and required an oath from them that they would do according to this promise. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year until the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the governor's provisions. But the former governors before me laid burdens on the people, and took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Yes, even their servants bore rule over the people, but I did not do so, because of the fear of God. Indeed, I also continued the work on this wall, and we did not buy any land. All my servants were gathered there for the work. Nay. 5-6-16, Bible, NKJV. Nehemiah's example is the solution of how to accomplish the restoration of the wall of separation between church and state. It is the model for how God has told this ministry that we must accomplish it, and which we carefully follow on this website. And I saw the beast, the kings, heathen political rulers, and the unbelieving democratic majorities who control them, of the earth, controlled by Satan, and their armies, gathered together to make war against him, God, who sat on the horse, and against his army. Revelation chapter 19 verse 19, Bible, NKJV. And I heard another voice from heaven, God, saying, Come out of her, Babylon the great harlot, a democratic state full of socialist non-believers, my people, Christians, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Revelation chapter 18 verse 4, Bible, NKJV. 3. About privacy. Our ministry officers, volunteers, and fellowship members are secret and a trade secret. Since we are all God's agents and fiduciaries, then we want all glory and praise and thanks to go only to Him, and not us or any man. Since this is a charitable ministry, the Holy Bible says this must be so. Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men, to be seen by them. Otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites, lawyers and politicians, do in the synagogues and in the streets, and in jury trials, scum, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. Matt. 6-1-4, Bible, NKJV. We do not maintain any of the following types of accurate or reliable records or information about any of our ministry officers, volunteers, or fellowship members because the SEDM Articles of Mission, Form number 01.004 prohibit direct marketing or advertising of any kind, member lists, member accounts, member mailing lists, customer lists. Instead, the only public interface that we have directly with our members are our member forums. This is the only method we have to notify our members of the latest happenings relating to our ministry, and we encourage our members to avoid entering complete or accurate information when they register to join the member forums or any other online data collection method connected with this website. None of the forum registration information is verified for accuracy, so you can enter whatever you want. The only thing that needs to be accurate is your email address. Everything we produce consists of anonymous educational and religious speech and beliefs that are not admissible as evidence, Free 610, and may be used only for education and for petitioning the government for a redress of grievances relating to illegal and unlawful behavior on the part of specific public servants. Such purposes are protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed with this, when it said, Anonymous pamphlets, leaflets, brochures and even books have played an important role in the progress of mankind. Talley v. California, 362 U.S. 60, 64, 1960. Great works of literature have frequently been produced by authors writing under assumed names. For despite readers' curiosity and the public's interest in identifying the creator of a work of art, an author generally is free to decide whether or not to disclose her true identity. The decision in favor of anonymity may be motivated by fear of economic or official retaliation, by concern about social ostracism, or merely by a desire to preserve as much of one's privacy as possible. Whatever the motivation may be, at least in the field of literary endeavor, the interest in having anonymous works enter the marketplace of ideas unquestionably outweighs any public interest in requiring disclosure as a condition of entry. 5. Accordingly, an author's decision to remain anonymous, like other decisions concerning omissions or additions to the content of a publication, is an aspect of the freedom of speech protected by the First Amendment. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. The freedom to publish anonymously extends beyond the literary realm. In Talley, the court held that the First Amendment protects the distribution of unsigned handbills urging readers to boycott certain Los Angeles merchants who were allegedly engaging in discriminatory employment practices. 362 U.S. 60. Writing for the court, Justice Black noted that persecuted groups and sects from time to time throughout history have been able to criticize oppressive practices and laws either anonymously or not at all, id. at 64. Justice Black recalled England's abusive press licensing laws and seditious libel prosecutions, and he reminded us that even the arguments favoring the ratification of the Constitution advanced in the Federalist Papers were published under fictitious names. Id. at 64–65. On occasion, quite apart from any threat of persecution, an advocate may believe her ideas will be more persuasive if her readers are unaware of her identity. Anonymity thereby provides a way for a writer who may be personally unpopular to ensure that readers will not prejudge her message simply because they do not like its proponent. Thus, even in the field of political rhetoric, where the identity of the speaker is an important component of many attempts to persuade, City of Ladue v. Gilio, 512 U.S. 43, 56 1994, footnote omitted, the most effective advocates have sometimes opted for anonymity. The specific holding in Talley related to advocacy of an economic boycott, but the court's reasoning embraced a respected tradition of anonymity in the advocacy of political causes. 6. This tradition is perhaps best exemplified by the secret ballot, the hard-won right to vote one's conscience without fear of retaliation. Under our Constitution, anonymous pamphleteering is not a pernicious, fraudulent practice, but an honorable tradition of advocacy and of dissent. Anonymity is a shield from the tyranny of the majority. McIntyre v. Ohio Elections Common, 514 U.S. 334, 115 S. Court. 1511, 131 L. ed. 2d 426 1995. Anonymous pamphlets, leaflets, brochures and even books have played an important role in the progress of mankind. Talley v. California, 362 U.S. 60 1960. Therefore, secrecy, at least in the context of this ministry, is a religious practice and the exercise of a political right that is protected by the First Amendment off-site link to the United States Constitution. Also, since the Constitution guarantees equal protection of the laws and because our opponent, the IRS, insists on protecting the identity of its employees in violation of the Freedom of Information Act (FOIA), then we are entitled to equal protection under the law as mandated by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment off-site link. We therefore have a solemn and binding contract with our members and more importantly with God Himself not to reveal any information about our ministry members to any third party. In fulfillment of that binding contract, we do not have a member mailing list or member accounts in our online store. Instead, if you want to receive our correspondence, then simply get an account on our forums with a bogus name. Information about our members is considered copyrighted, and a trade secret, and protected contractually from disclosure. We cannot and will not maintain any records about our members. All information that might produce an audit trail will be destroyed immediately. We cannot and will not ask for, use, or maintain information or records about people's interactions with the Internal Revenue Service or state taxing authorities, including information about Social Security numbers, taxpayer identification numbers, etc. If disclosure is ordered by any government, we are obligated to 5.1. Demand evidence and probable cause of wrongdoing and do not disclose any information without demonstrated probable cause. Such information must be provided by a third party who does not work for the government, receive any government benefit based on income taxes, or receive employment wages derived from income taxes. 5.2. If the evidence provided is not an inadmissible opinion pursuant to Fed. Rul. EV. 610, but is supported by facts from disinterested third parties, then we will disclose the information without charge or other resistance, but will insist that the recipient grant everyone in the ministry witness immunity as a precondition of disclosure, pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 6002. The government cannot and will not be allowed to interfere with this contract we have with our members, and the Supreme Court has said that the government is without authority to interfere with our private right to contract. Independent of these views, there are many considerations which lead to the conclusion that the power to impair contracts, either the Constitution or the Holy Bible, by direct action to that end, does not exist with the general federal government. In the first place, one of the objects of the Constitution, expressed in its preamble, was the establishment of justice, and what that meant in its relations to contracts is not left, as was justly said by the late Chief Justice, in Hepburn v. Griswold, to inference or conjecture. As he observes, at the time the Constitution was undergoing discussion in the Convention, the Congress of the Confederation was engaged in framing the ordinance for the government of the Northwestern Territory, in which certain articles of compact were established between the people of the original states and the people of the territory, for the purpose, as expressed in the instrument, of extending the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, upon which the states, their laws and constitutions, were erected. By that ordinance it was declared, that, in the just preservation of rights and property, no law ought ever to be made, or have force in the said territory, that shall, in any manner, interfere with or affect private contracts or engagements bona fide and without fraud previously formed. The same provision, adds the Chief Justice, found more condensed expression in the prohibition upon the states in Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution against impairing the obligation of contracts, which has ever been recognized as an efficient safeguard against injustice. And though the prohibition is not applied in terms to the government of the United States, he expressed the opinion, speaking for himself and the majority of the court at the time, that it was clear that those who framed and those who adopted the Constitution intended that the spirit of this prohibition should pervade the entire body of legislation, and that the justice which the Constitution was ordained to establish was not thought by them to be compatible with legislation or judicial precedent of an opposite tendency. 8 Wall. 623. 99 U.S. 700, 765. Similar views are found expressed in the opinions of other judges of this court. Sinking Fund Cases, 99 U.S. 700, 1878. Ayn Rand put it best, when she said in her book Atlas Shrugged about the subject of money, and the requirement for consent, honesty, and integrity by government in any and every endeavor, money is the barometer of a society's virtue. When you see that trading or religious ministry, for that matter, is done, not by consent, but by government compulsion or regulation. When you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men in the government who produce nothing, when you see that money is flowing to those who deal, not in goods, but in political favors, when you see that men get richer by graft and by pull, extortion under the color of law, than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, the government, but protect them, the government, against you, when you see corruption being rewarded by a corrupted federal judiciary and honesty and hard work and personal responsibility becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. Money is so noble a medium that it does not compete with guns and it does not make terms with brutality. It will not permit a country to survive as half property, half loot. Whenever destroyers, the IRS, the Federal Reserve, and the Department of Justice, appear among men, they start by destroying money, for money is men's protection and the base of a moral existence. Destroyers, in the Federal Reserve, seize gold and leave to its owners a counterfeit pile of fiat paper. This kills all objective standards and delivers men into the arbitrary power of an arbitrary setter of values, a corrupted government, in this case. Gold was, and continues to be, an objective value, an equivalent of wealth produced. Paper is a mortgage on wealth that does not exist, backed by a gun aimed by a tyrant judge with a conflict of interest at those who are expected to produce it. Paper, Federal Reserve notes, is a check drawn by legal looters upon an account which is not theirs, upon the virtue of the victims. Watch for the day when it becomes marked account overdrawn. When you have made evil government looting through constructive fraud, obfuscation and complication of the tax laws, and through socialist, humanist tax system that rewards and subsidizes laziness, irresponsibility, and government dependency and punishes and taxes success, the means of survival, do not expect men to remain good. Do not expect them to stay moral and lose their lives for the purpose of becoming the fodder of the immoral government parasites. Do not expect them to produce, when production is punished and government looting rewarded. Do not ask, who is destroying the world? You are, by doing nothing to correct the corruption or by accepting any of the stolen loot in the form of a government handout, bribe. Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand, p. 387. By making the above statement, Ms. Rand is emphasizing that there is no more important area where government honesty and integrity is necessary than in the way government handles money and commerce. A government that mishandles or covets money and steals it is a bad government that is intent on destroying, not protecting, society. The king, or public servant, establishes the land by justice, but he who receives bribes, socialist handouts, overthrows it. Prov. 29-4, Bible, NKJV. Getting treasures, stolen loot, by a lying tongue is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death. The violence of the wicked will destroy them, because they refuse to do justice. Prov. 21-6-7, Bible, NKJV. God says in the Bible that deceit in commerce, and by implication taxation as well, is the thing he hates most. What God hates, we are also supposed to hate as Christians, and notice the thing that is being hated is not a person, but an evil and unlawful behavior that violates God's laws and/or man's laws. Below is an explanation of precisely why God hates deceit in commerce so vehemently and why ultimately, those who openly and willfully practice it are going to hell, based on commentary relating to the Prov. 11-1, 10-10, 2023 found in the Bible. As religion towards God is a branch of universal righteousness, he is not an honest man that is not devout, so righteousness towards men is a branch of true religion, for he is not a godly man that is not honest, nor can he expect that his devotion should be accepted, for 1. Nothing is more offensive to God than deceit in commerce. A false balance is here put for all manner of unjust and fraudulent practices of our public disservants in dealing with any person within the public, which are all an abomination to the Lord, and render those abominable hated to him that allow themselves in the use of such accursed arts of thriving. It is an affront to justice, which God is the patron of, as well as a wrong to our neighbor, whom God is the protector of. Men, in government, make light of such frauds, and think there is no sin in that which there is money to be got by, and, while it passes undiscovered, they cannot blame themselves for it. A blot is no blot till it is hit. Hos. 12-7, 8. But they are not the less an abomination to God, who will be the avenger of those that are defrauded by their brethren. 2. Nothing is more pleasing to God than fair and honest dealing, nor more necessary to make us and our devotions acceptable to him. A just weight is his delight. He himself goes by a just weight, and holds the scale of judgment with an even hand, and therefore is pleased with those that are herein followers of him. A false balance, whether it be in the federal courtroom or in the government or in the marketplace, cheats, under pretense of doing right most exactly, and therefore is the greater abomination to God. Matthew Henry's Commentary on the Whole Bible, Henry, M. 1996, c. 1991, under Prov. 11-1. See our Memorandum of Law entitled Requirement for Consent, Form number 05.003 for further details on the explicit, informed, deliberate requirement for written consent in all free governments, and especially in the context of taxation and commerce. God commands us to hate evil, and if deceit in commerce is what he hates most, then we as Christians are to act and do similarly by exposing, opposing, and fixing it. We can't love God and not hate his opposite or his complete absence, which is what evil is. We can't love our neighbor as God commands in Gal. 5:14 and not hate the actions of a dishonest and covetous public servant who willfully and intentionally deceives, robs, and hurts our neighbor with no demonstrated lawful authority and no concern for even what the law says on the subject. We can't hypocritically go out and invade other countries like Iraq and Afghanistan on the pretense that we are fighting terrorism and defending freedom, what a joke, and still have a group of terrorist public servants running our own government here at home that completely disrespects and tries to hide the requirement for explicit consent of the people in every aspect of governance and taxation. If you want some examples of how our public servants chronically and willfully violate and hide and avoid the requirement for informed consent, read Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302 Sections 4.4.16. That is not equal protection of the laws, it's tyranny and terrorism cleverly and deceitfully and willfully disguised as government benevolence. Original pre-Orwellian definition of the word terrorism. Funk and Wagnall's New Practical Standard Dictionary 1946. Our troops might be better utilized by fighting federal government terrorism and democracy instead of republicanism, emanating from what Mark Twain calls the District of Criminals, District of Columbia. Not Iraq. Hate of evil, but not people, perpetrated by public servants who are violating our Constitution, federal law, and God's law as a family and even a Christian value. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, synonymous with hate evil, to walk in all his ways, laws in the Bible, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, laws, which I command you today for your good. Doi. 1012-13, Bible, NKJV. You who love the Lord, hate evil. He preserves the souls of his saints, he delivers them out of the hand of the wicked. Psalm chapter 97 verse 10, Bible, NKJV. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous, and he who is upright in the way is an abomination to the wicked. Prov 29-27, Bible, NKJV. The boastful shall not stand in your sight, you hate all workers of iniquity. Psalm chapter 5 verse 5, Bible, NKJV. Through your precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. Psalm chapter 119 verse 104, Bible, NKJV. Let us hear the conclusion of this whole matter. Fear, respect God and keep his commandments, laws in the Bible, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. ECCL. 1213-14, Bible, NKJV. By humility and fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life. Prov. 22-4, Bible, NKJV. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance and the evil way and the perverse mouth I hate. Proverbs chapter 8 verse 13, Bible, NKJV. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day, for surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. Prov. 23:17, Bible, NKJV. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who hate you? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred, I count them my enemies. Psalm chapter 139 verses 21-22, Bible, NKJV. I hate and abhor lying, but I love your law. Psalm chapter 119 verse 163, Bible, NKJV. A righteous man hates lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and comes to shame. Prov. 13-5, Bible, NKJV. Hate of evil is the essence of morality and morality is the essence of religion. A religion without hate of evil is not a religion at all, but a vain social club. God hates the sin but he loves the sinner and we are commanded to be like God. Obedience to God's law by hating evil, in fact, is the essence of what religious practice means and the essence of what the First Amendment's free exercise clause was intended to protect. Consequently, hate of evil, in fact, is a protected religious practice under the First Amendment and the essence of how we worship, reverence, respect, and obey our mighty God, according to the Bible. Hating evil is the essence of what is called police powers in the legal field. Police powers are the essence and authority for all earthly laws and the reason why people create governments to begin with, the desire for protection. Hating evil, in fact, is what governments, the police, and the justice system have made a profession out of. If they, as our servants can do it, then we as the sovereigns and their masters can do it. Anyone who criticizes the Christian virtue of hating evil is basically saying that we shouldn't have law, civil government, or law enforcement and that we shouldn't have religion at all. Indirectly, they are promoting anarchy and lawlessness. They are also saying that the Constitution contradicts itself and is redundant and unnecessary, because the sovereign people, we the people, cannot delegate to government through a written constitution and authority called police powers that they themselves don't have as individuals. Those who slander Christians for trying to hate evil are biased and prejudiced, if they are going to say that atheists in government can hate evil under man's law while Christians can't hate evil under God's law. That is not equal protection of the laws, but anarchy and prejudice and hate deceptively disguised as an altruistic pursuit of civil rights. It is a devious way to rebel against God's holy moral laws by interfering with their enforcement. It is mutiny against God that will ultimately land all of its followers in hell. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away. And there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works, by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Rev. 2011-15, Bible, NKJV. A society without hate of evil is like a body without an immune system, and our society right now has AIDS. Our society is dying and self-destructing because of complacency towards evil in the government, which is AIDS. A corrupted tax system is simply one of many symptoms of this pernicious disease that afflicts us. The true danger is when liberty is nibbled away, for expedience, and by parts. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, or to trust dishonest or deceitful public servants to do the right thing. Edmund Burke. The greatest menace to freedom is an inert, passive and uneducated people who refuse, as jurists and voters and active citizens, to expose and punish evil in the government. Whitney v. California, 274 U.S. 357, 1927. The violence of the wicked will destroy them, a free people, because they refuse to do justice by exposing, rebuking, and resisting, and punishing evil. Prov. 21-7, Micah chapter 6 verse 8. Therefore submit to God. Resist the devil in the government and he will flee from you. James chapter 4 verse 7, Bible, NKJV. For the government to even define what a religion is would be to limit and interfere with its free exercise under the First Amendment. A problem common to both religion clauses of the First Amendment is the dilemma of defining religion. To define religion is in a sense to establish it. Those beliefs that are included enjoy a preferred constitutional status. For those left out of the definition may prove coercive. First Amendment law in a nutshell. Baron Dinez, West Publishing, ISBN 0-314-22677-X, p. 432. The Bible confirms the above, where it says, "Can you, a heathen lawyer with lust for power and money, search out or comprehend or define the deep things of God in a statute or law? Can you, in your finite and sinful existence, find out the limits of the infinite and perfect Almighty?" Job chapter 11 verse 17, Bible, NKJV. My God does not live in your legal box, Mr. Covetous and atheistic lawyer. How can a finite mind of an unbelieving lawyer who hates and defies God's holy laws define or even comprehend an infinite God or the religion and worship of those who serve this sovereign God? They can't. Because 501 c. status requires that exercise of religion be defined by government and law and put inside a legal box and subject to state regulation and control, then it must be voluntary and cannot be coerced, whether the coercion comes directly from the government or indirectly from financial institutions who are under illegal duress by the government to induct religious institutions into their jurisdiction and regulation by compelling the use of government-issued identifying numbers. The only moral authority any government can have is to protect those who are being harmed by others. See Great IRS Hoax, Form #11.302, Sections 4.4.3 and 4.4.5. The Supreme Court above already said in Meyer v. State of Nebraska, 262 U.S. 390 1923 that religion and education and morality are to be promoted and not discouraged, because they can only do a person good and not harm. Beyond its only legitimate purpose of protecting people from harm by others, government has no moral or lawful authority to interfere with anyone's religious exercise and certainly not with this strictly educational religious ministry. Those who already walk submissively will say there is no cause for alarm. But submissiveness is not our heritage. The First Amendment was designed to allow rebellion, especially towards government corruption and tyranny, to remain as our heritage. The Constitution was designed to keep the government, and especially the government, with their slave surveillance numbers (SSNs), off the backs of the people. The Bill of Rights was added to keep the precincts of belief and expression, of the press, of political and social activities free from government, and especially IRS surveillance. The Bill of Rights was designed to keep agents of government and official eavesdroppers in the government away from assemblies of people. The aim was to allow men to be free and independent to assert their rights against government. Laird v. Tatum, 408 U.S. 1, 92 S. Court. 2318 1972. Depriving liars who lied on a W-4 by calling themselves federal employees called taxpayers of stolen loot and bribes deceptively labeled as government benefits cannot be classified as harm to the public either. Payment of government benefits is not contractual, it is discretionary according to the Supreme Court. Where there is no contract, there can be no breach of contract or harm. See Fleming v. Nestor, 363 U.S. 603 1960. We must conclude that a person covered by the Act has not such a right in benefit payments. This is not to say, however, that Congress may exercise its power to modify the statutory scheme free of all constitutional restraint. Fleming v. Nestor, 363 U.S. 603 1960. Therefore, payment to the government for these so-called benefits through income taxation cannot be contractual either. The government cannot compel people to participate in bribery and theft cleverly disguised using words of art to appear like lawful taxation. Equal protection of the laws guaranteed by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment demands this. Not only that, but anyone who takes out anything more than exactly what they put in, is a thief if anyone was compelled to participate against their will. The Bible says that all such thieves must be forced to pay back double what they stole to the victims of the theft. If a man, the government, in this case, delivers to his neighbor, a citizen, in this case, money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, or out of his paycheck, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. Exodus chapter 22 verses 7-8, Bible, NKJV. The victim of the theft, in this case, are all the non-taxpayers who never wanted to participate in this bankrupt humanistic, socialist tax and welfare state system to begin with. According to the Treasury Financial Management website statistics, over 56% of all federal revenues go to pay for socialism and wealth transfer, both of which are forbidden by the Constitution and the Supreme Court and the Bible. We have publications that openly admit the government is misusing its powers of taxation to promote socialism, by using it to redistribute wealth. We have presentations on pastors on how the government's taxing powers delegated through the Constitution are being illegally employed and enforced. Below is what the Supreme Court and the Bible and other authorities say on this subject of illegal, state-sponsored socialism of this nature. To lay, with one hand, the power of the government on the property of the citizen, and with the other to bestow it upon favored individuals to aid private enterprises and build up private fortunes, is none the less a robbery because it is done under the forms of law and is called taxation. This is not legislation. It is a decree under legislative forms. Nor is it taxation. A tax, says Webster's Dictionary, is a rate or sum of money assessed on the person or property of a citizen by government for the use of the nation or state. Taxes are burdens or charges imposed by the legislature upon persons or property to raise money for public purposes. Cooley, Const. Lim. 479. Loan Association v. Topeka, 20 Wall. 655 1874. A tax, in the general understanding of the term and as used in the Constitution, signifies an exaction for the support of the government. The word has never thought to connote the expropriation of money from one group, the working or the rich, for the benefit of another, the poor, the retired, or the unemployed. U.S. Supreme Court in United States v. William M. Butler, 297 U.S. 1, 1936. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves money from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidate promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy always followed by dictatorship. Alexander Fraser Tyler. Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure, unearned money from the government that war in your members and your democratic governments? You lust after other people's money and do not have. You murder the unborn to increase your standard of living and covet the unearned and cannot obtain except by empowering your government to steal for you. You fight in war against the rich and the non-taxpayers to subsidize your idleness. Yet you do not have because you do not ask the Lord, but instead ask the deceitful government. You ask and do not receive, because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures. Adulterers and adulteresses. Do you not know that friendship with the world, or the governments of the world, is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world or the governments of the world makes himself an enemy of God. James chapter 4 verse 4, Bible, NKJV. Here I close my opinion. I could not say less in view of questions of such gravity that they go down to the very foundations of the government. If the provisions of the Constitution can be set aside by an act of Congress, where is the course of usurpation to end? The present assault upon capital, theft, and wealth transfer by unconstitutional taxation is but the beginning. It will be but the stepping stone to others larger and more sweeping, until our political contest will become war of the poor against the rich, a war of growing intensity and bitterness. Supreme Court in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust Co., 157 U.S. 429, 158 U.S. 601, 1895, hearing the case against the first income tax passed by Congress that included people in states of the Union. They declared that first income tax unconstitutional, by the way. This unlawful abuse of government power to steal is not only morally wrong and illegal, but it is completely inconsistent with the legislative intent of the Constitution, and the passage of no amount of time can alter the legislative intent of the Constitution. Courts are bound to interpret the Constitution based solely on what it says and the legislative intent existing at the time it was enacted. Instead, they commit treason punishable by death 18 U.S.C. Section 2381 by stealthily redefining the words in the original Constitution to mean what they want them to mean using judge-made law so as to suit public policy rather than legislative intent. The Ten Commandments say, "Thou shalt not steal." They don't say, "Thou shalt not steal unless you are the government." Don't steal. Your public servants hate competition. In Calder v. Bull, which was here in 1798, Mr. Justice Chase said, that there were acts which the federal and state legislatures could not do without exceeding their authority, and among them he mentioned a law which punished a citizen for an innocent act. A law that destroyed or impaired the lawful private labor contracts and labor compensation, e.g. earnings from employment through compelled W-4 withholding of citizens, a law that made a man judge in his own case, and a law that took the property from the worker, and gave it to the government or another citizen, such as through social welfare programs. It is against all reason and justice, he added, for a people to entrust a legislature with such powers, and therefore it cannot be presumed that they have done it. They may command what is right and prohibit what is wrong, but they cannot change innocence into guilt, or punish innocence as a crime, or violate the right of an antecedent lawful private employment contract by compelling W-4 withholding, for instance, or the right of private property. To maintain that a federal or state legislature possesses such powers of theft, if they had not been expressly restrained, would, in my opinion, be a political heresy altogether inadmissible in all free republican governments. 3 Dol. 388. Sinking Fund Cases, 99 U.S. 700 1878. Any entity that can break the Ten Commandments and not suffer the same punishment under the law as everyone else in a society based on equal protection of the laws is a false god and an idol, and the Ten Commandments make idolatry not only a sin, but the worst kind of sin punishable by death. Any misguided individual who tolerates, participates in, subsidizes, or votes in favor of this type of lawlessness and criminal activity on the part of the government is committing treason and also is violating the second great commandment to love his neighbor. Come out from among them, the unbelievers, idolaters, and thieves. And be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch, associate with or subsidize what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verses 17 to 18, Bible, NKJV. You don't steal from someone you love, and neither do honorable or respectable members of society tolerate, benefit from, subsidize, or condone government servants who do the stealing either. Objections to the income tax renewal are long, loud, and general throughout the country. Those who pay are the exception, those who do not pay are millions, the whole moral force of the law is a dead letter. The honest man makes a true return, the dishonest hides and covers all he can to avoid this obnoxious tax. It has no moral force. This tax is unequal, perjury-provoking and crime-encouraging, because it is a war with the right of a person to keep private and regulate his business affairs and financial matters. Deception, fraud, and falsehood mark its progress everywhere in the process of collection. It creates curiosity, jealousy, and prejudice among the people. It makes the tax gatherer a spy. The people demand that it shall not be renewed, but left to die a natural death and pass away into the future as pass away all the evils growing out of the Civil War. Congressional Globe, 41st Congress, 2D Session, p. 3993 1870. The main and perhaps only attraction by most people of participating in this bankrupt welfare state system to begin with is the irresistible allure of getting something for nothing. This is covetousness and envy in its worst form. The government has appealed to and encouraged the greed and covetousness and sinfulness of us all by promising something for nothing. They have made a business, a federal corporation, see 28 U.S.C. Section 3002 of 15, out of procuring your votes and allegiance by offering to steal that which you didn't earn and don't deserve and bribe you with it. They have procured your vote with loot stolen and plundered from your working neighbor and the richest and most successful members of society that produce the most. Any society that punishes success and rewards failure, covetousness, and irresponsibility in this way is doomed to destruction. If people were told the statistical truth by our deceitful public servants when they joined the Socialist Insecurity Program and by implication, the federal tax system as well, which is that, they will not be allowed to collect any more than they put in. The government will withhold steal between 30 to 50% of the money they put in to administer the program. The rate of return on their investment will be -10% per year if they die. The government keeps everything and they can't will anything to their relatives. The program is rapidly headed for bankruptcy and there is no way to sustain the standard of living that current retirees enjoy for the younger participants. This is a result of both a declining birth rate and excessive government deficits that cannot be fixed without reducing benefits. There would immediately be a massive revolt by the people, who would refuse to join and demand their money back. Christians cannot be socialists and it is against the Bible to be one. The government is lying to prop up a failing Ponzi scheme headed for certain destruction. The only reason this fraud and abuse continues is because it is a convenient tool for politicians to procure votes, but it represents the worst kind of harm, deceit, and abuse of the people's weaknesses. Widespread government dependency and chronic government deficits can do nothing but injure and take away the sovereignty and freedoms of the people over the long haul by continually growing the size and power of the government. The history of liberty is the history of the limitation of governmental power, not the increase of it. Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States. We now have a few rhetorical questions for those in favor of the status quo. Is there anyone in government who is making sure that people who receive the stolen loot from this totally corrupted system aren't thieves by making sure that no one takes out more than they put in? Not. May not act as jurists or voters in tax or benefit cases because they have a clear conflict of interest in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 208? Not. Is anyone in government making sure that the victims, which are the non-taxpayers who are compelled to involuntarily participate by coercive private businesses and ignorant and biased jurists, are properly reimbursed for their involuntary and stolen contributions? Not. Is the IRS counseling and disciplining and punishing coercive employers who violate the consent of their workers by forcing them to participate in an entirely voluntary system of usury? Not. Is the IRS even willing to tell private businesses in states of the Union that they don't have to participate in the system of federal withholding and that there is no law that requires them to volunteer or participate unless they are a federal agency? Not. How can a legal and political system that doesn't do any of the above claim to dispense justice, and if it doesn't dispense justice, then what does it dispense? Injustice? Evil men do not understand or care about justice, but those who seek and obey and worship the Lord understand all. Prov. 28-5, Bible, NKJV. Woe to you, scribes, religious leaders, and Pharisees, lawyers, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin to the false god of government with your attorney licenses and your 501 and privileged tax exemptions, neither of which any positive law requires, and have neglected the weightier, most important matters of the law, God's law, justice and mercy and faith in God and truth. These you ought to have done, without leaving the others undone. Jesus in Matt. 23:23, Bible, NKJV. What Jesus was condemning above is the ongoing sin of omission by our public disservants, which are all the things that they should have done but didn't do as our fiduciaries to protect their fellow Americans from illegal and unconstitutional plunder by their government and fellow citizens. The conclusion is therefore inescapable that our public disservants working in government have not only willfully and knowingly become a thief, but that they are consenting with the thieves who they are paying benefits stolen loot to, and especially if the recipients drew out more than they paid in. When you, a government worker, saw a thief, a socialist voter or a covetous judge or congressman, you consented with him by your silence, inaction, and sin of omission, and have thereby been a partaker with adulterers, thieves and government idolaters. You give your mouth to evil, slander and presumption and prejudice in open court, and your tongue frames deceit, constructive fraud in the tax code, or the misinterpretation of that code by the judge or the IRS publications. You sit and speak against slander your brother, fellow American, non-taxpayer in front of naive jurists who have been propagandized in the government schools to wrongfully trust government. You slander your own mother's son. These things you have done, and I, God, kept silent. You thought that I was altogether like you, but I and my servants and followers will rebuke you, and set them in order before your eyes. Psalm chapter 50 verses 18-21, Bible, NKJV. We would argue that the reason that political discourse has become so polarized of late is precisely because people are arguing about how to redistribute this plunder that our public disservants have stolen. If the government didn't have any of our money and couldn't redistribute wealth by illegally and unconstitutionally abusing its taxing powers, then would it really matter who gets elected to office, and would people care as much as they do now about who gets elected? Can a society in which over half of American voters now receive illegal bribes from the government cleverly disguised as benefits cure its addiction to stolen loot and reform itself through a democratic political process? Not. Republican values, strict observance of the Bill of Rights by the legal profession and judiciary, and religious faith and the morality it produces are the only cures for this evil. Theft violates God's law, no matter whether it is done by a single person or a mob of people within a totalitarian socialist democracy. Might does not make right. It must be conceded that there are rights in every free government beyond the control of the state or a jury or majority of electors. A government which recognized no such rights, which held the lives, liberty and property of its citizens, subject at all times to the disposition and unlimited control of even the most democratic depository of power, is after all a despotism. It is true that it is a despotism of the many of the majority, if you choose to call it so, but it is not the less a despotism. Lone Assen v. Topeka, 87 U.S. 20 Wall. 655, 665, 1874. Sometimes, it takes leadership as a public servant to do the right and honorable thing, even when the people you serve aren't always aware enough to know or appreciate exactly what they need and what the Lord requires of them. This kind of respect and concern, in fact, are the heart of what it really means to love your neighbor in the Bible. My son, if you become surety for your friend or fellow American or for his social security or other government benefits, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger by filling out a tax return, for instance, you are snared by the words of your mouth, you are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend, slavery. Go and humble yourself, plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, a corrupted covetous government and covetous voters who want to steal from the rich and give to the poor by abusing the government's taxing power, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Prov. 6-1-5, Bible, NKJV. My son, if sinners, socialists, in this case, entice you, do not consent if they say, "Come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood of innocent non-taxpayers, let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them alive like Sheol, and whole, like those who go down to the pit, we shall fill our houses with spoil, plunder. Cast in your lot among us, let us all have one purse, share the stolen loot. My son, do not walk in the way with them, do not associate with them, and don't let the government force you to associate with them either by forcing you to become a taxpayer, government whore or a U.S. citizen. Keep your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely, in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain or unearned government benefits, it takes away the life of its owners. Proverbs chapter 1 verses 10-19, Bible, NKJV. What right have you to declare my statutes, write man's vain law, or take my covenant, the Bible, in your mouth, seeing you, idolatrous voters who have made government their idol, parent, social insurance company, and false god, hate instruction, education about liberty on this website, for instance, and cast my words behind you? When you saw a thief, the IRS, and a corrupted judiciary, you consented with him by helping him steal, and have been a partaker with adulterers, whores in receipt of stolen loot. You give your mouth to evil in the obfuscated tax code and the slandering and persecution of non-taxpayers, Christians, religious icons, and ideology, and your tongue frames deceit in the IRS publications and in federal courtrooms all over the country. You sit and speak against your brother in kangaroo courts of injustice that refuse to admit evidence of government wrongdoing. You slander your own mother's son and every non-taxpayer who refuses to volunteer to become a whore, taxpayer, and to join the socialist democratic mob of looters. These things you have done, and I, God, kept silent. You thought that I was altogether like you, but I will reprove you, and set them in order before your eyes. Now consider this, you who forget God, lest I tear you in pieces, and there be none to deliver. Whoever offers praise glorifies me, and to him who orders his conduct aright I will show the salvation of God. Psalm chapter 50 verses 16-23, Bible, NKJV. And I saw the beast, the kings, heathen political rulers and the unbelieving socialist democratic majorities who control them of the earth controlled by Satan, and their armies, gathered together to make war against him, God, who sat on the horse and against his army. Revelation chapter 19 verse 19, Bible, NKJV. And I heard another voice from heaven, God, saying, Come out of her, Babylon the great harlot, a democratic, rather than republican, state full of socialist non-believers, my people, Christians, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Revelation chapter 18 verse 4, Bible, NKJV. By the way, those who choose to follow the Lord's calling above in Rev. 18-4 to come out of Babylon the great harlot, disassociate, in a legal sense, become nationals and not citizens under 8 U.S.C. section 1101 of 21 and non-residents who are not subject to the civil jurisdiction of either the federal or national governments. This is covered in our free memorandum of law entitled Non-Resident Non-Person Position, Form number 05.020. Below is what God says he, and by implication we as his followers and mighty army, can and will and should do about this wicked and evil corruption of our de jure constitutional republic, right from the Bible, alas, sinful nation. A people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord and his sacred moral laws in the Bible, they have provoked to anger the Holy One of Israel, they have turned away backward. Why should you be stricken again? You will rebel against God's laws and the Constitution more and more. The whole head is sick, they are out of their minds. Insane or stupid or both, and the whole heart faints. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, the IRS and the Federal Reserve and a corrupted judicial system. Defend the fatherless, plead for the widow and the ignorant and non-taxpayer. How the faithful city, the republic, has become a harlot, whore. It, the de jure constitutional republic, was full of justice, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers and abortionists and socialists and fornicators and welfare recipients and liars and corrupted judges and thieving lawyers. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. Your princes, president, congressmen, judges are rebellious of the Constitution. Everyone in the IRS and the crooked Congress who oversees them loves bribes and follows after money and power and political rewards. They do not defend the fatherless or the murdered aborted children, nor does the cause of the widow or the non-taxpayer or of prosecution of government wrongdoers come before them in the crooked courts. Therefore the Lord says, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will rid myself of my evil adversaries, and take vengeance on my enemies. I will turn my hand against you, and thoroughly purge away your dross, and take away your alloy. I will restore your judges, eliminate the bad judges, as at the first, and your counselors, eliminate the bad lawyers, as at the beginning. Afterward you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Isaiah chapter 1 verses 1-26, Bible, NKJV. Thomas Jefferson, who was a Christian, an avid student of the Bible, a President of the United States, a judge, our most revered founding father, and author of the Declaration of Independence, echoed the very words of the Bible above when he made the following insightful and profound statements below. I do not charge the judges with willful and ill-intentioned error, but honest error must be arrested where its toleration leads to public ruin. As for the safety of society, we commit honest maniacs to bedlam, so judges should be withdrawn from their bench whose erroneous biases are leading us to dissolution. It may, indeed, injure them in fame or in fortune, but it saves the Republic, which is the first and supreme law. Thomas Jefferson, Autobiography, 1821. Me 1–122. The original error of the Constitution was in establishing a judiciary independent of the nation, and which, from the citadel of the law, can turn its guns on those they were meant to defend, and control and fashion their proceedings to its own will. Thomas Jefferson to John Wales Epps, 1807. Fe 9–68. It is a misnomer to call a government republican in which a branch of the supreme power, the federal judiciary, is independent of the nation. Thomas Jefferson to James Pleasance, 1821. Fe 10–198. Contrary to all correct example, the federal judiciary are in the habit of going out of the question before them, to throw an anchor ahead and grapple further hold for future advances of power. They are then in fact the corps of sappers and miners, steadily working to undermine the independent rights of the states and to consolidate all power in the hands of that government in which they have so important a freehold estate. Thomas Jefferson, Autobiography, 1821. Me 1–121. We all know that permanent judges acquire an esprit de corps, that, being known, they are liable to be tempted by bribery, that they are misled by favor, by relationship, by a spirit of party, by a devotion to the executive or legislative, that it is better to leave a cause to the decision of cross and pile than to that of a judge biased to one side, and that the opinion of 12 honest jurymen gives still a better hope of right than cross and pile does. Thomas Jefferson to Abby Arnault, 1789. Me 7–423, papers 15–283. It is not enough that honest men are appointed judges. All know the influence of interest on the mind of man, and how unconsciously his judgment is warped by that influence. To this bias add that of the esprit de corps, of their peculiar maxim and creed that it is the office of a good judge to enlarge his jurisdiction, and the absence of responsibility, and how can we expect impartial decision between the general government, of which they are themselves so eminent a part, and an individual state from which they have nothing to hope or fear, because of official and judicial immunity? Thomas Jefferson, Autobiography, 1821. Me 1–121. At the establishment of our state and federal constitutions, the judiciary bodies were supposed to be the most helpless and harmless members of the government. Experience, however, soon showed in what way they were to become the most dangerous, that the insufficiency of the means provided for their removal gave them a freehold and irresponsibility in office, that their decisions, seeming to concern individual suitors only, pass silent and unheeded and even unpublished by the public at large, that these decisions nevertheless become law by precedent, judge-made law, sapping by little and little the foundations of the Constitution and working its change by construction before anyone has perceived that that invisible and helpless worm has been busily employed in consuming its substance. In truth, man is not made to be trusted for life if secured against all liability to account. Thomas Jefferson to A. Corre, 1823. Me 15–486. It is left, to the juries, if they think the permanent judges are under any bias whatever in any cause, to take on themselves to judge the law as well as the fact. They never exercise this power but when they suspect partiality in the judges, and by the exercise of this power they have been the firmest bulwarks of English liberty. Thomas Jefferson to Abby Arnault, 1789. Me 7–423, papers 15–283.